All right, well, I'm here with Thomas from the project at Hope City. He's the young adult pastor and a good friend of mine. And I thought we'd bring him in as a guest to talk about just pastoring the young adults through this COVID-19 crisis. I've always respected Thomas's opinion on young adults, just in general, but wanted to hear his thoughts on what we can do to be better pastors with young adults. Especially, I'm noticing in this COVID-19 thing, Thomas, there's a lot of information and a lot of resources out there, like for children, preschool, youth, and for just like online church. But I actually was like, man, I don't see anything out there for young adults. No one's really talking about it. And the crazy thing is that we kind of just think, oh, they'll be fine, right? That's kind of the perception I've seen is like, oh, like they'll be fine. They can just kind of, maybe they'll like the youth content. Well, they'll probably just like online church, but like they're a very, very unique and specific group, which we've talked about in the past a lot. So I guess want to just kind of get your thoughts on a couple different things, and feel free to interject or share anything that you might want to share. But what has it been like the last couple of weeks for you? Like how has it changed? And what has it been like adapting to a shutdown church, a shutdown world where you can't meet in person and you're working with a very specific group like young adults?
Like young ministries are fairly by nature inconsistent ministry, just because you think about all the decisions that need to be made between 18 and 30 years old, and there's so much life change. There's changes in relationships, there's changes in sometimes vocations, there's changes in just who you are. Just physiologically, but just emotionally and everything. There's so much changes. But at least if there's a bit of like a physical touch point, whether that is you meet once a week, or you got small groups, things like that, there seems to be this really good like biofeedback that you get from each other to be able to like understand what people are doing. You can set up appointments with people, meet with them and counsel. This is difficult because I've found pastoring through this, it's been a lot harder to actually really know where our young adults are at. Generally we've found, yes, like some of them at first kind of enjoy the fact that I don't have to go to class maybe for the first little bit. And, I get to hang out with my roommate. And then when it started getting super serious, I think there was a bit of fear. Jobs started getting lost. Dealing with the age of mental illnesses like depression, they feel loneliness I think they feel loneliness at a higher level than the elderly do. And so, this is really a recipe for either disaster for a lot of young adults, or if we look at it a different way, which is what as a pastor, this is what I'm praying through and looking at it, is going, not only do we just respond to what's going on and the anxiety and things like that, but how do we actually help them look at it as a point of launching in their own life, of how they deal and work through this stuff. And so pastoring, don't really get to young adults. You don't get to be with them physically. You have to kind of try to find a way to help identify where they're at and kind of take their spiritual temperature, their mental temperature, through video, even like this, right? Or putting out stuff on social media and seeing how they're reacting and responding. And so it's a bit more of a guesswork, I guess. That's one of the pieces to it. And the second thing is, I think the question that always has to be asked, and I don't have an answer to this, is what needs to stay consistent? What needs to stay the same to provide consistency for people? And then what do we actually need to adapt? And how are we going to adapt that? Those are some of the major ways. Of course, like everything's through digital, so present the gospel, but how do we get people interested in it, get them in to it? People don't want to worship on a screen for very long. What does that look like? Are we, how do we, sometimes when we think we're like helping anxiety, putting up so much content can sometimes actually add to their anxiety. And, you create almost this codependency that unless you put something out every day, that they're going to like somewhat suffer. And I think we can have a sense of self-importance, whereas that's not fact. We still want to be able to lead them to Jesus. We want them to be able to lead them to scripture and to prayer and to being able to self-manage through this. And so it's that balance of how do we do that responsibly as pastors, leaders. Those are a few things, Jeff. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. So kind of going along that way, like if you're noticing, loneliness and stuff like that, like I guess what would be the biggest concern that you see? What's the biggest issue you see right now? Is it loneliness? Is it something like that? And then kind of launching off of that, what is a concern you have for where this is going? Like what is that next problem that you kind of suspect might be coming out? Kind of mentioned mental
Yeah.
health is there, maybe that's it, but yeah, like what are you seeing now that's the biggest issue? And then what is the next kind of hill that you think we might have to climb with young adults as a church?
Yeah. I don't think we're actually feeling the full weight of this. I think we're only really going to get the full weight of this probably a month or two down the road. Um, I think when it comes to, yeah, let's just talk about, just mental health issues. I mean, even talking with people over the last week of just going, it's really hard at home. And me as a pastor, I mean, I have to be careful. I have my family at home. Most of these people don't have anyone at home. And that can be super hard to deal with, and part and parcel of that too is many young adults don't know the difference between retrieving and escapism all day, or I've got 9 hours screen time on my phone, and recognize how that's actually deteriorating their own mental health and their spiritual health and their physical health as well, right? So they're not maybe putting that together. And so I actually think the weight and the burden is actually only going to show up a month or two down the road. And I think I'm preparing myself and my team to really create, I guess, inroads of care down the road. And so we're prepping virtual groups, not for now, but a month or two down the road to respond to those things, because that is just one thing. I think another piece too is uh, it. Let's say a couple months down the road we're allowed to meet together again. We may not be able to meet in big groups again for a while, and how do you manage through that? What does that look like? And so I think that's another piece to it. I think practically, I was thinking about this morning and kind of praying about it, was how do we get our young adults to stay home though? I think majority of them are taking it super serious, but when you're at the end of April and into May, you're pretty tempted to leave and think it's going to be okay and leave your house and meet with people. And I think it's how do we just continue to encourage them to isolate themselves, where that could be the very place they're finding it hard to be in. And I think we have to find a way to help them manage through that. But I actually think it's really going to be a month or two down the road where we start seeing the full burden of what's going on.
Yeah, well, even that gets me thinking too, when I've thought about it a little bit, but it really brought to the forefront when you said it, that, I think we're kind of in this mindset that we're going to be just, okay, May, June, and then, okay, well, let's open the dam is broken. Everyone floods out into the streets. It's going to be like when World War II ended, there's people kissing randomly, that like famous picture in the streets of London.
Yeah,
Like, just like a celebrate, like the end of Star Wars: Return of the Jedi on
yeah, totally.
on the teddy bear planet or the Ewoks or whatever. Like it's just fireworks, but no, like it's going to be a trickle out effect, and like so larger,
Yeah,
not even large churches. Like it probably, what if we can't have more than 100 people meet? Well, 50 people meet for like 2 months, and
huge.
when you are meeting, you have to wear a mask. Like I was listening to a doctor yesterday who said you may be wearing masks in public mandated until January. Like
Yeah,
it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable, no matter what it is.
yeah,
So how do we?
yeah. And uh, yeah, how do you, yeah, and I think we need to be ready for this to be long term. So I think we may see actually online platforms and physical platforms actually become more of a hybrid. I think our ministries need to become hybrid that way. How we, even us at the project, I came into January, preparing myself and my team to move more digitally anyways. I think that's where content needs to be. I think especially reaching people who don't know Jesus yet. How do we build value when it comes to how do I just help you as a young adult walk through this? And I think there's a huge opportunity for ministry here. I mean, Google search for prayer has gone up exponentially over the last 3 weeks. How do I pray? And And I think that gives us opportunity to go back to those basics. But I think another thing that we're not recognizing too, Jeff, and I'll mention this is, so the sex toy industry has jumped 40% in the last 2 weeks. Pornhub released their stats, and people accessing porn has skyrocketed more than it's ever had in history. Alcohol sales have gone up exponentially. When you're at home and you have even an increased lack of accountability, we may be really shifting into a place where we're not just dealing with a lot of those maybe sins, but like the shame that comes from it and the adjustment to normal life, the kind of ruckus it'll cause and how they form their relationships and their understanding of those things. And we may have people who are back into addiction. We have people who may start new addictions. We always are just saying, I can't wait till we get to meet together. We don't realize that it's when we start meeting together when there's going to be a lot that we're going to have to really prepare for as pastors and think through. And what can we do right now, right? What can we do right now to begin sowing those seeds into those moments where we do get to speak in people's lives? What do we do and help prepare for some of that outflow?
Yeah, I remember reading, I remember I suspected one of the first things I thought of was some of that stuff like day 2. And I looked up the stats on how much is like 1 week in, or try to find an article, and there's already articles up on like, yeah, Pornhub being crazy through the roof. But I remember reading an article like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, it would have been more than that, that the amount of porn site traffic from the city of the team that loses the Super Bowl immediately after they lose skyrockets every time. So there's this built-in, not that this conversation could turn into like a podcast about dealing with porn, but it's good, because you're right. I think that's one of the major things that people are going to be doing to deal with it. But there's lots of different examples where, as a society, we go to pornography as a release for extreme stress. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's quite a bit of that going around right now, of extreme stress and
yeah.
So that is interesting, and that's so kind of what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we need to be looking beyond just getting online and being happy that our churches can meet and that Zoom is this cool thing, or Google Hangouts, and hey, we managed to still meet, we live in a great time, and those are all good things. It's great that this isn't 1995 or 1950, because it would be extremely difficult. We might be using a rotary phone and whatever, but that would be the extent of the technology. But like, there are things that I think we're not preparing for yet. Like in 2 months, that's going to be a big issue. So I like what you're saying there, because I think leaders, whether it's a youth pastor, or whether it's a young adult pastor, or whether it's a lead pastor in their 50s or 60s who has a congregation that's quite a bit older, like, there's a tidal wave of unexpected repercussions coming our way.
Like there also is most likely to be a tidal wave of really good consequences too. Right. I think people are recognizing, oh my goodness, I do need community. I do need to find better ways to cope and self-manage. I want to be in community. And I think we've seen more people added to some virtual online communities or some virtual communities, and they're recognizing the value of connecting. We've been able to use it as a platform of saying the best way you can alleviate suffering in our city and our world right now is to stay home and isolate and connect with people, is reach out, is how are they doing, and this can be an incredibly selfish time of life for young adults, because there's so many decisions to be made, and they're so worried about making the right things. And so it's an opportunity for us to teach and to continue to pastor the idea of, how do I think of someone else? How do I give out of what I have and share that? And so I think there will be negative consequences that we need to prepare for and pray through. And I think one of the things we need to do is not only prepare for that future, but how can we presently continue to pastor and lead them from reacting to this to how do we actually respond to the opportunity that God has given us right now and work that way. not in a blind way of saying that, oh, everything's okay, but no, maybe not everything is okay. But how can I help you recognize where Jesus is at right now in the moment you're in? And that's our job, isn't it? Is in this place, most people respond to Jesus in a time when what they thought was normal doesn't work anymore. And so there could be some really good consequences. But yeah, what I am saying is this is this is the beginning, and this will be a long road of recovery. And I don't think maybe even our physical communities will ever be the same. I saw someone today, they're projecting a 30% decrease in congregation over the next year or two, that there's expecting about 30% of people not wanting to go back to church after this. And if our job is just trying to find as many people as possible to show up and watch, that's not ministry. We have to just go beyond that a little bit.
That's good. All right, so I guess just we'll end with one last question, and that'd just be, what if you could give one or two pieces of advice if someone's sitting there, whether they're a lead pastor or a young adults pastor, or they're the volunteer in their church that's the youngest person who happens to have a driver's license and they've been asked to do young adult ministry, and they're scraping to figure out what to
Yeah.
do. Kind of, you've given a lot of really good content there, but if you could give like just one or two things, if you could just sit down in front of them and say, here's the thing that you need to be focusing on right now, or here's the next step for you, what would that be?
Teach them to pray and teach them to hear God through scripture. I mean, maybe it sounds too simple, but people want to know that God is listening, and they want to know that God is speaking. And so, we've been focusing a bit more of our time on, like, so I'll do every week on a Wednesday, I'll do an Instagram live Bible study. And what I'm trying to get at is, how do I help you hear God and respond to him? Because here's the thing, Jeff, like, I don't, do I care that they show up to the project after all this? Yeah, but not as much as, will they just like will they go to Jesus, and do they know how to do that? And I think that is a really great way to help people cope, B, what it means to retreat into their soul and to find out what Jesus is saying and hear his voice. And thirdly, I think it's the only way that they're going to actually hear Jesus help them respond to everything. And if we can increase their love for God, then we know that we're going to increase their ability to love other people around them. And so I say, if there's one thing you can do, is teach them to pray, to speak to God in prayer, and to hear him in scripture. Be creative how you do it. But this whole month, we're going through a series of Psalms. We're talking about shame this week. Yesterday, we talked about doubt. And I want them to see how oftentimes the Psalms help us pray the things we can't pray, and to hear God in these moments that we feel we're scared and don't know what to do. So teach them, to speak to God and to hear from God.
That's great, man. I love what you said there, Thomas, because it's basically what I'm hearing is the mission hasn't changed. Right?
No,
Like it's
no,
so
yeah,
easy to get caught up in like, oh, I need to have like 5 or 6 different touch points on 15 different platforms and make sure every person sees me and it doesn't forget about our church, so that they don't forget to tithe. Like the pressures of that.
right?
And not that that's the driving force of everything, but I'm sure like that becomes, that's a part of it. And there's anxiety for us as pastors and leaders, but like at the end of the day, like the mission is the same. Like if people don't know Jesus better because of your ministry, and not because of what your ministry did presentation wise, but because of what you pastored people towards. Not that it's bad for your pastoring to use creative outlets, but if they don't know Jesus better at the end of this time than they did when they entered it, then we failed as pastors.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think if I could add one thing, would be help them to just be in community with other people, help them to reach out. I think that's a big thing. And so I can't meet with every single young adult virtually, but I can help young adults meet with each other. and encourage those things. And yeah, have fun with it. Be creative. I think we have this incredible method to get across things and use it. But you're absolutely right, man. I mean, our job is not to lead them to us; it's to lead them to Jesus. And this is, I mean, it's right there. The opportunity is right there. And so, let's use it.
That's great. And then, so before I let you go, one of the things I always enjoy discussing with you is book recommendations. So if you had a book that you're reading right now that you want to, that you would recommend to somebody that you're comfortable sharing, that they could get on, if they're looking for something to read, or whether it's a leadership that, helpful with being a pastor, or whether it's just something to stretch their mind. What are you reading right now, and what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I'm actually, well, right now I'm just on a bit of a historical bend, and so like I just read a biography on Alexander the Great, so it's not really going to help too much when it comes to this. And
There's not a lot of
so
digital content in there.
no, there's really not a lot. That was a bit more of a book I want to read myself. Well, you know what? Like my next books that I'm actually reading is The Pastor in a Secular Age and Faith Formation in a Secular Age. Those are a couple books that were really, really recommended to me to read, and so those are the next ones I'm taking. But I've also started the book Your Burden on Porn, just thinking through what we're going to have to walk through after all this and prepping. It just generally for young adults, it's called The Defining Decade. It's really, really good book. Just talking about some of the different conversations young adults are having in their head. And how do we process that? And so I found that to be a pretty helpful book working through some of these things, but I'll send you a few others, Jeff, if you want, that may be better than these.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Gives a couple of things to look to. Well, awesome. That's all the time that we'll take on this one, but I want to say thanks, Thomas, for joining us. And if anybody has any questions or anything like that, is there an email that they could get a hold of you for?
Oh, totally. Yeah, would love that. I'm always looking to try to connect with others, especially talking about young adult ministry. This is all guesswork, right? This is all we do is just guesswork. And so it's nice to guess with other people. So you can email me at tomas.b@hopecity.ca.
So thomas.b@hopecity.ca.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's the one.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to do this, and look forward to chatting in the future.
Yeah, thanks for asking me, Jeff.